Good afternoon. So congratulations on having done the essay. I take it we're all emotionally exhausted at this point. And we, on the other hand, are full of curiosity as to what you guys did. So we're looking forward to that. So today we start phase 2. Today we move to another level. And the first text that we look at today is Jasper's Meaningful Psychic Connections. That is quite a hard article. I think it's quite hard. Did you find that hard? Hard or easy? Did you get hold of it? Sorry? It was an email everyone in the class should have got. Okay. Put up your hand if you did not manage to get hold of the Jaspers at all. Okay. I did mail it out. It may have just got classified as spam or something. I'll double check to make sure it's on the BSpace. It should be on BSpace, and you should all have access to BSpace. Okay, so we'll go through this, just a little bit of this today, and maybe later come back to it, because although it's difficult, it's incredibly rewarding. On Wednesday, we'll look at brief paper by Russell called Analogy in the Chalmers collection. Analogy, it's just 2-3 pages, 2.5 pages, something like that. So that should be somewhat more straightforward. But let's start out by just mapping out where I think we've got to and where we're going to go in the rest of the class. The thing that the point that we've come to many times is that it seems to have possible to have complete scientific understanding of an organism, whether it's another human or a bat or anything at all, without having imaginative understanding of it. And without having imaginative understanding, it seems like you don't know the first thing about the mind of that organism. What's missing in our understanding of the bat? The key thing is not more scientific data. The key thing is getting some sense of what it's like from the animal's point of view, knowing what's going on in there. And something like that seems to be true of the split brain patient, that understanding roughly what's going on with the split brain patient in scientific terms is not too difficult. But the reason the patient seems so kind of mind-bending when you first encounter this phenomenon is that you can't get what it's like in there. You can't get the world from their point of view. And that was what was going on with Mary too. There was some sense. I know that some of you challenge this, but the basic point was that Mary has all the scientific data there is, but she doesn't seem to know anything about what color experience is like. She can't imagine having color experience. In the inverted spectrum, the point there was you can know all about the functional organization of the person sitting next to you. You can know how their brain, how the color system in their brain is all wired up. But your imaginative understanding of what their color experience is like seems to leave open these different possibilities. That when you look at the scene in the left, when they look at the scene in the left, top left, they could be getting what you get when you look at the scene in the top right, or when you look at the scene in the bottom right, or when you look at the scene in the bottom left. Their functional organization would be just the same. But your imaginative understanding, that seems to be something beyond any scientific knowledge of the person sitting next to you. It seems to be adding something. It seems to be something extra. Or if you think about Blockhead, the robot with 1 billion people driving it, that's something that, from a functional point of view, could be just like you or me, but there's nothing to imagine there. Imaginative understanding doesn't have anything to provide, and for that reason, we say it doesn't have a mind. And that's what really bedevils any attempt to say explicitly what mental states are. If you say, well, pain is C fiber firing, the trouble is that Variable realizability seems to mean that you could have animals that you can perfectly well imagine being in pain, even that you could know to be in pain, like the octopus, but that are quite different to you or me, just don't have C fibers. They're quite different physically, even though their minds might be in that same kind of state. And similarly, if you try and say, well, being in pain is just a matter of tending to behave in a particular way, you can imagine Putnam's super Spartans that have got the pain all right. You can clearly imagine having the pain without having any tendencies to behave in any way at all. Or if you say pain is just being in a particular functional role, well, Bloch's robot seems to show that you could imagine that functional role without there being any pain there for you to understand. So, in the next big block of this term, we'll look further at what imaginative understanding is. I mean, I've talked about it. I think it's very intuitive. There's some sense in which you all already know what it is, but just look a bit further about how you characterize it. And then the relation between imaginative understanding and a scientific understanding of one another. I think once you get the topic framed like that, I first managed to get the topic framed like that over the summer, and since I have got it like that, I feel like one of these patients that see their preoccupation everywhere. Suddenly it seems to me this is the central question in our culture at the moment. You pick up the New Yorker or the New York Review of Books or whatever you think is a marker of our culture, Wired or whatever, then I think everything you see is battling with this question. What is the relation between our imaginative understanding of one another and scientific explanation of one another? Is scientific explanation a kind of bulldozer that is really eventually going to knock down everything and achieve a total understanding of everything to do with human beings, to do with the mind? Or is there always going to be a place for imaginative understanding? All the arguments we've looked at so far are suggesting that there is always going to be a place for imaginative understanding. And there's this kind of boulder, this nugget consciousness that just resists scientific understanding. And is sometimes said to be the top of the top 10 outstanding scientific problems at the moment. It may be that it's going to turn out, as Nagel said, that it's not scientifically soluble. And if that happens, then we will really have to work backwards and say, maybe it's not just consciousness. Maybe there are other aspects of what humans do that can be understood, that can be known imaginatively, but can't be understood scientifically. So we'll be going on to look at those questions. Second, after giving some more characterization of what imaginative understanding is, then we'll look at how these issues connect to freedom of the will, to the idea that it's up to you what you choose to do. You're responsible for what you choose to do. And the identity of the self, how you think about what a person is, how you think about the connection that you have to your future self or to your past self. And at the very end, we'll go back to Searle's thing about the Chinese room and the role of imaginative understanding in knowing what's going on when someone's speaking a language. Is that, knowing what's going on when someone's speaking a language, is that something that we can understand completely in scientific terms? Or is it always going to be that knowing what's going on when someone understands a language involves an exercise of the imagination? Okay, that's our task for the rest of the class. Is that? Hello, are we all on board? The bus is leaving. Any questions about that? Okay. Okay, so with the Jaspers today, I want to start out with a point that's pretty technical, and it may seem a little bit removed from the Jaspers, but I promise you, I think it's a small piece, but I think it's very helpful to have in place when you're looking at Jaspers. That's the distinction between general and singular causation. So first of all, say what that distinction is between general and singular causation, and then we'll go on to look a bit about what that has to do with the thing Jaspers is concerned with, imaginative understanding. Most generally, I think causation is a really important idea here. The idea of something one thing causing another thing, one thing making another thing happen, one thing making a difference to another thing. That's a really key notion for your picture of what's real in the world. I mean, it's a traditional idea. It goes back to Plato. The idea that if it exists, it must make a difference. I mean, I know that people say the numbers exist, but the reason that this lectern exists, but that elves and goblins and so on don't exist, is that this lectern, in however small a way, makes a difference to what happens. It causes things to happen. That's the mark of something existing. Elves and goblins don't make any difference. Therefore, they don't exist. So it's a really intuitive idea that existing has something to do with making a difference to what else happens. Now, our imaginative understanding of each other seems to use causal Yep. Aha. All right. That's one possible theory, right? That elves and fairies and so on cause us to have stories about elves and fairies, right? Now, that's what you might call the historical accuracy view of fairy tales, right? But another view is that they are just creatures of the heat-oppressed brain. No fairies, no fairies were involved in the making of this story. You see what I mean? These are two different pictures. Your view is one I respect, but I don't share, right? That whoever wrote these stories was actually watching what was going on at the bottom of the garden. You see what I mean? But I think your way of putting it there, that's another way of saying fairies are real. They exist. Yeah. At the start of a work of fiction, at the start of Garrison Keillor's Lake Woebegone Tales, for example, it says any resemblance to anyone existing is purely coincidental. Yeah, people often say that. That's to say, nobody that exists was the cause of me writing this story. That's what he's saying. Yeah, your guy who says, oh, well, actually, it is all about that one, is saying that one exists. Yeah, you can take the story as correct about that. Yeah. Okay. So I think that actually, if you think about it, that actually just is a way of amplifying the point about the connection between existence and causation. So my first point is imaginative understanding of each other is all about causal explanation. Imaginative understanding of one another involves figuring out what's making what happen in someone's mind or in their behavior. And similarly, of course, scientific explanation is all about finding out what causes what makes what happen. That's why science is so handy, right? Science tells you what drugs is a good idea to take, what drugs is a bad idea to take. That's what they do. So if that's right, then imaginative and... wait a minute, I've missed out something here. Right. I don't know how I missed that out. I want to say it's not just that our imaginative understanding of each other involves knowing about causes. It's that life or death can literally depend on our imaginative understanding of what caused what to happen in someone's mind. And suppose you have a court case. Suppose one person killed another. Everybody agrees he hated the guy. But it's also true that the guy he killed was attacking him. So then the question is, there are two motives for this killing. One is, let's say, revenge. The other is self-defense. Everybody agrees that the person who did the killing had both these motives. Right? That's not a completely fanciful case. Yeah, that kind of thing happens. So then the issue before the court is, which was the motive that caused him to act? Not which motive did he have, because everybody agrees he had both motives. The issue that the jury or the judge are being called on to settle is which motive made him act. And that's something that the jury or the judge or whoever establishes by imaginative reasoning. They try and get the picture as to what was going on. They try and... we were discussing this in a seminar where someone who works, who spent many years working in the criminal law, said, look, I can tell you exactly what happens in this kind of case. The counsel for the defense says to the defendant, so this huge guy was coming at you with a knife, right? So what could you do? And the counsel for the prosecution says, is it not true that you weigh 100 pounds more than the deceased, and that it was actually just a tiny little knife? It wasn't a big knife at all. And what they do is they try to steer the imaginative understanding of the court one way or another to seeing which motive was the one out of which the action grew. Right? And as I say, this is entirely practical. This is really whether someone dies, whether someone is executed, may hinge on that causal judgment there, made in the basis of imaginative understanding. Yeah? So this is really practical. I mean, this is not just some speculation. This is the way things work. So imaginative reason is something that we use, and we use it every day. We don't just use it to in these dramatic court cases. Suppose that you and I have had a minor argument, and then we're both in a crowded elevator, and you stand right on my toe. What I make of that will depend a lot on whether I think it was our row that caused you to stand on my toe. Right? I will use my imaginative reasoning there in just the same way to figure out what was going on. And that's really going to matter for my future. I promise you. That will I bear grudges. That will really matter for my future relationship with you. Right? So just watch it. That's all. But you see, well, actually, seriously, you see what I mean? This kind of thing matters in a small way every day in everybody's life. So imaginative and scientific reasoning can be held to have a similarly licensed authority to declare what's real, to tell you what's going on in the world around you. They are both identifying the causally significant factors in our surroundings. And we use them both to get knowledge of what's making what happen around us. So that's a general line of thought that I want to test out in the next few classes. So I said general causation and singular causation. This is a really... the first time I heard this, it sounded fantastically technical. It's a very intuitive distinction. General causation is when people say things like smoking causes cancer. That's to say, this type of thing, smoking, causes that type of thing, cancer. Aspirin prevents headaches. Excess sugar, I don't know, what does excess sugar cause? Obesity, right? These general things that we get, particularly about our health the whole time, that's general causation. In contrast, you have singular causation, which is when one event causing another. So there's one thing to say that smoking causes cancer. There's another thing to say, Sally smokes, smoking causes cancer, and Sally got cancer. After all, it could be that smoking causes cancer, and that Sally smokes, and that Sally got cancer, but not that Sally's smoking caused Sally's cancer. Was that too fast? Should I do that again? You want that again? Put up your hand if you want that again. Wow, okay. It's good, isn't it? Okay, you can be raising a question, did Sally's smoking cause Sally's cancer? If, for example, you are a relative of Sally's, or if you are Sally, wondering if you should raise a case against the drug companies, I mean against the cigarette companies, then what you want to know is, was it the cigarette smoking, my cigarette smoking, that caused this particular cancer? You see what I mean? When BP, when there was that huge oil spill in the Gulf, people said, okay, what caused this oil spill? They didn't want to know some general thing like bad bad management of oil drilling equipment causes oil leaks. They didn't want to know that. They wanted to know what caused this particular leak. You see what I mean? So here what you're asking is, did Sally's smoking cause her cancer? And what I was saying was, it doesn't answer that to be told smoking causes cancer and Sally smoked. Because after all, something else might have been the cause of her cancer. How about that? Having said that this was very simple and intuitive and not technical, I don't seem to be explaining it. No, put up your hand if that's plain as day. Okay, and if you'd like me to do that one more time? Okay, twice is enough? Okay, maybe I'll do it again at the end. Okay, so general causation is a relation between variables. So a variable is something like age or income, something that has particular values, like 3 years old, 73 years old, whatever. Income, $10,000 a year, $100,000 a year, $1 million a year, whatever. Yeah? So a variable is something that takes on different values. And when you say smoking, what you mean is something like you can smoke to different levels and you can get cancer. There can be different probabilities of you getting cancer. And the amount you smoke is correlated with the probability of you getting cancer. You see what I mean? Yeah. So you're talking about a relation there between variables, the variables smoking and cancer. Or if you say how early you go to bed causes your health and happiness, right? There's two variables, how early and level of health, level of happiness. Yep. That's general causation. Singular causation is a relation between particular events. Okay? Happy with that? Okay, I know you you may be able to see my point, but I know the point of my point is not yet clear, but that will emerge. Okay. So one thing that always strikes me is that you can always know, you can know about general causation without knowing anything about singular causation. In the general problem, people always say correlation does not imply causation. So you find a correlation between people taking some drug therapy and recovery from an illness. Right? That happens. You find a correlation between taking the drug and whether you recover from the illness. The people who do take the drug, let's suppose, are more likely to recover from the illness than the people that don't. Would that establish a causal connection? Would that establish that taking the drug causes the thing? Why not? Anyone? Yes? The people who are taking the drug could just inherently be healthier. You have to control for different variables. Okay, very good. Yeah. Is that what you were thinking too? Perfect. Yeah. There's a really dramatic example of this with hormone replacement therapy, where my understanding of this is that there was a good correlation between hormone replacement therapy and beneficial effects in health. And so this huge study was started across the US, where people were randomly partitioned into groups, some taking hormone replacement therapy, some not. And the whole thing had to be halted halfway through when it became clear that the therapy was damaging people. And the natural diagnosis is something like this, that there's some third factor. People who are taking the drug, people who are taking the therapy, are the people who tend to look after themselves, the people who tend to be careful about their diet, who tend to take exercise, all that kind of thing. And the people who don't are less likely to be doing that. So that factor, how well you take care of yourself, is actually what's causing the correlation. It's making you take the drug, and it's making you get better. So there's a correlation, but there isn't a cause. So what you do in a randomized controlled trial is you put everyone into two groups, and you randomly assign them. You come from outside. An experimenter puts the whole population into two big bins, as it were. And you randomly allocate people to one bin or to another. And then you come from outside the system and seize control of the level of drug in everybody's blood. You make sure that the people in this bin are all getting a particular quantity of the drug. You make sure that the people in this bin are not getting the drug. And then, under those conditions, if there's a correlation between getting the drug and recovery, that can only mean that there's a causal connection between the drug and recovery. Yeah, because that's what you mean when you say controlled. There couldn't be any other systematic background factor here that was responsible for a systematic difference between your two cohorts. That plain as day? So that's causation. That's what causation is. That's what general causation is. Now, the thing about that is, when you find... Put up your hand if that's perfectly clear what I just said. Okay? And if it's clear, clear but not perfectly? No, if you don't quite get something in what I said. Yeah? Aha. Very good. Okay. So what you're doing here, suppose you have a drug trial taking place, like a recent, this is actually an ongoing thing, tamoxifen and breast cancer. They're a huge study, tens of thousands of subjects across 5 continents are in a big trial to find out, does tamoxifen really prevent breast cancer? Yeah. So you're doing that study, you look at your data for thousands of subjects, and you say, okay, it is or it isn't. But do you need to know of any particular subject whether their taking tamoxifen was what prevented them from getting breast cancer? Well, I think you clearly don't. Yeah? You can find out about the general causation without finding out about the singular causation. You can find out that smoking causes cancer by doing a big study. You don't need to know of any particular person, Sally, whether or not her smoking caused her to get cancer. All you're looking at are the data from those big bins of people without knowing anything about what went on with any one of them. Right? I don't see why you would need that. I don't see why you need any specific examples first. That's what I'm saying. You don't need to know of any particular case whether their smoking caused their cancer. You just put 1,000 people in those 2 bins. Yeah. And if you get these systematic effects, then you can draw the conclusion without knowing for anyone what went on with them. Yep.
So there's a reverse of that. For almost every specific causation provides an evidence gathered by
Yes, that's very interesting. I'll give you an example in just a moment that suggests that's wrong. Yeah, but it's a very natural idea, and it may in the end be correct. Yeah, it needs a lot of discussion. That it's a great idea. So the first thing I'm trying to get here is just the difference between general causation and singular causation. The relations between them are really interesting. Yeah, your point is you couldn't know that Mary's smoking caused Mary's cancer unless you knew in a general kind of way that smoking is the kind of thing that causes cancer. Yeah, that's a very natural idea. Yeah. That's what you're suggesting, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, that's what he's saying. You need to know the general causation in order to know the singular causation. I agree that's very intuitive. Anyone else want to come in on that? Okay, well, what about this case? Here's a famous example in the causation literature from L.J. Good and Chris Hitchcock. Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty. Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty? Yeah? Okay, before my time. Okay. Okay, so Sherlock Holmes, as you will doubtless recall, is at the base of the Reichenbach Falls. Meanwhile, up at the top of the Reichenbach Falls, on the cliffs, is his nemesis, Moriarty, the apotheosis of evil. And Moriarty, as you will doubtless recall, has a large boulder. And what is he doing with the boulder? He is rolling it along the top of the cliff, ready to whack it down on top of Holmes. Now, Moriarty is very good at this stuff, right? Once Moriarty gets a clear shot at Holmes, that's it for Holmes. So Watson sees what is going on, and Watson rushes up to Moriarty and randomly pushes the boulder out of Moriarty's grasp. And you watch the boulder falling down the cliffs, boom, from side to side, randomly, until whack. Who does it land right on top of? It squashes Holmes flat. He is as dead as a kipper. Okay, that's the story, right? What caused Holmes's death was Watson's pushing the rock. Yes? It was Watson's pushing. You can follow it. You can play back the movie. It was Watson's push of the rock that led boing, boing, boing to Holmes's death. Yeah? If the rock is what? If the rock is not in there. I hope you're not changing my story. Do this again. There's no one pushing the rock. That could have happened too, but that's not what happened. Yeah, it was Watson gave the rock a good hard push. I promise you, you play the movie. That's just what happened. Yeah, it's my story. You see what I mean? Yeah, you're telling a different story where it wasn't Watson that caused the death. Fair enough, and maybe that's the way it should be told, but that's the way I'm telling it. Yeah, and in that case, it was Watson pushing the rock that caused the death. Yep. The last decision. You could. There's a causal chain here. Yeah, all I'm saying is Watson's pushing the rock is in there on that causal chain. Yep. Yeah, he didn't intend it to happen, yeah. Yes, it would be very tough to blame Watson, right? Yeah, and he certainly didn't intend that to happen. It was the opposite of what he intended. Yeah, poor old Watson. Manslaughter at best. But anything else on that? Okay, so the point about this case is it's hard to see what the general causation is here. Like you guys were saying, you can't tell if Sally's smoking caused Sally's cancer unless you know that smoking caused cancer. But in this case, what Watson did was he gave the rock a random shove. Is it a general law that random shovings cause deaths of people underneath? Well, no. I mean, random shovings are actually less likely to cause deaths than Moriarty's kind of diabolical aiming of the rock. Yeah, everything that happened here was kind of unlikely, but you can see the causal trajectory. You can literally see the causal trajectory. I mean, so it might be that Sally's smoking. Similarly, if you followed from the intake of the particles to the generation of the cancer cells, it could be that you could watch each thing that happened with the cells, boing, 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 boing. Even though smoking didn't in general cause cancer, it could be that in this particular case, boing, 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 it did cause the cancer. You see what I mean? So I'm not saying that in the end you're wrong. Yeah, it's obvious there's a lot of complexity here, but just straight off, it's not quite obvious what the connection is between general causation and singular causation. You'll see that this is really important in the psychological case in just a second. Yeah, it really matters for our understanding of each other at this point. Okay, you want to come back on that? Yep. Sorry?
It's not just a matter of specifics, though. In general, rocks following people. So that was the specific.
Yeah, but I'm talking about what Watson did. It was certainly the rock falling that killed Holmes. No argument of that. Maybe that is a general law. You get a rock, that's all she wrote. Yeah. But the thing is, what was Watson's role in this? Yeah. Okay, so let's look at Jasper's. Time is moving on. Okay, so here's Jaspers explaining the difference between basically scientific understanding and imaginative understanding. He says, we sink ourselves into the psychic situation and understand genetically by empathy how one psychic event emerges from another. And then on the other hand, he says, you can find, this is the scientific thing, you can find by repeated experience that a number of phenomena are regularly linked together. And on this basis, we explain causally. So that second thing is like the randomized controlled trial, right? That's what you do with drugs. And in the psychological case, you can find things like, well, the kind of thing that Yoda is always saying. What does Yoda say? Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to suffering. Yeah? Have I remembered that correctly? It seemed very important when I heard it the first time. Anyway, that's general causation, right? That's like smoking causes cancer. Yep. Anger leads to suffering. Yep. Of course, there are plenty of cases like that. Anxiety causes insomnia, for example. Yep. That we use every day. So those are the second kind of thing, scientific understanding. Jaspers is a psychiatrist. Jaspers is one of the great founding fathers of psychiatry. And this distinction, he's thinking of this really with psychiatric patients, where sometimes you get a patient, you can empathize with them. You can get yourself into their head and understand genetically by empathy how one state of the patient, how one preoccupation to the patient is arising out of another. And sometimes you just have to stand back and say, I can't get inside there at all. I have no idea. That's what you're doing when you say this is a crazy person. You're saying don't even bother trying to get inside their head. Just look at them scientifically. Look at the regularities governing their psychological states. So Jasper says that empathy or imaginative understanding provides us with a grasp of meaningful causal connections. And here's another quote. These connections have also been called internal causality. You're watching the inner movements of the mind, indicating the unbridgeable gulf between genuine connections of external causality and psychic connections, which can only be called causal by analogy. So Jasper's way of thinking of it is the kind of causal connection that you find in a drug trial, or that you can equally do this kind of thing that you do in a drug trial, come from outside, grab hold of the variable, the level of the drug or whatever. People do this with stuff like anxiety and insomnia. You come from outside, a bunch of people, you put them into two bins, you make some of them really anxious, you make some of them less anxious, you see what that does to their sleep. Yeah? You can study it like that. That's what he's calling external causality. On the other hand, there's when you're deep in someone's head, you know exactly what your friend is going through. When you're in an idle moment, it just goes through your mind what's going on for them, what they are suffering. And you're understanding then from the inside how one thing is emerging from another. And he says that's called causal only by analogy. He says in the natural sciences, we find causal connections only. When we're doing ordinary scientific explanation, we get causal connections. But in the case of the mind, when we want knowledge of someone's mind, our bent for knowledge is satisfied with the comprehension of a quite different connection. And here's a couple of key quotes, key examples. There is a lot going on in these quotes, so let me just dwell on them a moment. Psychic events emerge out of one another in a way we understand. Attacked people grow angry and spring to the defense. Okay, so you're watching your friend being attacked. You see her getting angry. You understand exactly what is going on in there. Cheated persons grow suspicious. The way in which such an emergence takes place is understood by us. Or it's just part of our ordinary imaginative understanding of one another, that you understand how one psychological state, how one mood or how one action grows out of another. Thus, we understand psychic reactions to experience. I mean, psychic is a little bit weird to our ears, I guess, but he just means mental states, the mind. Thus, we understand psychic reactions to experience. We understand the development of passion, the growth of an error, the content of delusion and dream. We understand the effects of suggestion, an abnormal personality in its own context, or the inner necessities of someone's life. And finally, we understand how the patient sees himself and how this mode of understanding becomes a factor in his psychic development. So this is kind of long, but this is really wonderful stuff. So just follow through what he's saying here. The key thing here is the second half of the quote. Because we note the frequency of a meaningful connection, that does not mean that the meaningful connection becomes a rule. He's saying when you get this imaginative understanding of one event meaningfully giving rise to another, that does not mean you've got a general law here, like smoking causes cancer or anxiety causes insomnia. Frequency in no way enlarges the evidence for a connection. Induction, getting generalizations here, only establishes the frequency, not the reality of the connection itself. For example, the frequency of the connection between the high price of food and theft is both understandable and established statistically. So if you imagine being poor and the price of food being high, then you can understand why you would steal the food. And it's also established empirically. Social psychologist does a study. They find there's a connection between the price of food and the level of theft. But so that's like what you guys were saying about you've got to know that smoking causes cancer in order to know that Sally's smoking caused Sally's cancer. But here's this beautiful example. The frequency of the understandable connection between autumn and suicide is not confirmed by the suicide curve. Suppose, I know this is kind of a grim example, but suppose your friend commits suicide. You are with them. You know how the autumn hits them. You imagine it from the inside. You say, it's really a lot of it is it was the autumn. And things went so badly for him in the autumn. The autumn, he just always got the blues. You understand what the autumn was doing to him, and you say that was a factor in him committing suicide. But that's not confirmed by the suicide curve. The suicide curve shows a peak in the spring. So there's no generalization here. It's not that autumn generally causes suicide. It did it for your friend, and you understood from the inside what happened there. But that doesn't need there to be a general thing. So this is like the rock going down the cliff. You could follow what was going on in your friend's mind, even though it being autumn actually makes it less likely that you'll commit suicide. The fact that it was autumn was playing a role in causing the suicide in this particular case. You could follow your friend's mood. You could get how one psychological state was bringing out another. One actual case can get you the occasion to establish a connection. Yeah, so that's like the boulder going down the rocks there. Yeah, you can follow what's going on in someone's mind, but there's no general rule. Okay? Is that plain as day? I can do that again if you like, or we can move on a little bit. Yes? You can certainly draw a causal connection between spring and suicide in two ways. One is, you could say there's a general rule, spring often causes suicide. Spring, just as smoking causes cancer, you could find, if you randomize and look at randomizing every other factor, except whether it's spring or not, you could find you're getting bigger systemic effects in suicide from spring than from any other season. Yeah. So then you could say in a general way, spring causes suicide. And it could also be that when you look at other cases, you find from the inside, when you empathize from the inside with someone else who committed suicide. This is frequency. This is absolutely frequency.
So based on what frequency, there's no evidence for the causal connection.
That's right. But you can still know there was a causal connection in a particular case.
Okay.
In that the rock falling down the Reichenbach Falls way. You see what I mean? Yeah. Okay. 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 Yeah. Yeah. No, he's saying there's what he calls external causal trends. Yeah, they're like the kind you routinely get in science, where everyone's put into two bins and you see what the systemic differences are. Yeah, so he's saying certainly you can have that with the spring and the suicide. Yeah, is that answering your question? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, actually, let me give you just one other story about. This is a story from that a psychiatrist colleague of mine gave me that I think is from an actual case, and I may garble it a little bit, but a psychiatrist is having a therapeutic session with a patient who has a history of abusive relationships, and they work. It turns out the patient's father died when she was 7. And they work out a narrative in which it's the absence of the father that is causing all these difficulties in later life. It's a successful session. They work through it. The patient goes away content. And the psychiatrist is content. That's been a successful, helpful therapeutic session. And he looks up the books. Is there, in fact, an established regularity here? Is there, in fact, a correlation between absence of a parent and a history of abusive relationships? And there's nothing. He can't find a single thing. So what do you conclude from that? What are you? I mean, this is not a kind of speculative thing. This is not some mad thought experiment. This is something that really happens. Jaspers has it there in this really concise thing. But this is something that's a live issue for lots of people every day. What do you make of that connection? What Jaspers is saying is that in that kind of case, you can say, I followed through the singular causation. I got what the track, like the bouncing of the rock from psychological state to psychological state. I got how it goes with this patient from the death of her father to these terrible relationships. I got how it went. That doesn't need to be backed up by general rules of the smoking causes cancer, absent parents cause abusive relationships type. It's a different kind of causation. This is singular causation, not general causation. Okay, I know there are more questions, but we're out of time. So look, let's do this. Let's carry on with Jaspers, because this stuff, I think this stuff is so important. And we'll carry on with the Jaspers on Wednesday and do Russell on Friday. Okay, happy with that? Okay, good.